Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with host Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
We thank our patrons for supporting us and making this podcast possible.
We do. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
This week, what's hot in the news is Josh Duggar. Josh Duggar from the TLC show 19 and Counting was arrested last Thursday on he was arrested by the U.S. Marshals and Homeland Security, HSI, Homeland Security Investigative Unit. He was given 2 federal charges for receipt of child pornography. And ever since I had a conversation with David Pittman, I don't like the word child pornography. He brought up a really good point, and a lot of people are getting away from that word because pornography implies some sort of consent.
Right.
So a lot of people, including National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, I think the term that they use is child explicit content.
I like that much better.
Yeah, I do too.
For the same reason, because a child can never give consent for that.
No. So he has 2 federal charges of receipt of child explicit images for a child under the age of 12 and possession of child explicit images, including videos. I guess he downloaded some of these, which came as no surprise to a lot of us. And I want to say, too, the fact that the U.S. Marshals and HSI is involved in this is a pretty huge deal, and that there was no bond given. I think that's a pretty huge deal, and we can't underestimate the significance of that, because HSI, we have a friend who's very high up in HSI. We have friends in the U.S. Marshals. For them to be called in to investigate, it's got to be really serious.
Very serious, yes. Right.
So I think there's a lot more to this story that's going to come out. Josh, of course, pleaded not guilty. And I want to read a statement from his parents, because I thought this is pretty indicative of where they've been throughout this whole journey, because this isn't the first time by a long shot that Josh has been in trouble. The statement from his parents with his recent arrest is this: "We appreciate your continued prayers for our family at this time. The accusations brought against Joshua today are very serious. It is our prayer that the truth, no matter what it is, will come to light, and that this will all be resolved in a timely manner," they added. "We love Josh and Anna and continue to pray for their family." What's striking to me is that there's no mention of victims. There's no mention of praying for victims, because child explicit images and videos is not a victimless crime. These are real children that are really being raped on video.
Right. It breaks my heart to know of this, because Josh and his family were so well loved and well respected by millions of people. And what this does to a community of people who love them is really hard. It's hard. And when parents make a statement such as this, they're pretty much asking and appreciating prayers for them, for the pain that they are going through, because it's a very public pain.
Yeah.
And it's embarrassing. It's sad. It's, of course, will cost them money, all of everything.
And
so,
reputation and,
yeah, the
all
whole
that.
thing that's involved with that.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, Jimmy. There is no asking, pleading, or petitioning prayers for the children that were involved. And once again, I mean, we've talked about this time and time again in our podcast. The
Mm-hmm.
focus is on the abuser,
Right.
not the abused.
Right. And
And
this is a theme throughout, not just the Duggar family, but this is
right,
consistently in religious communities where forgiveness is the central theme. And so the Duggars came out back in 2015 when Josh was caught on Ashley Madison, which is a
right,
site for finding people to cheat on your
right.
spouse with. It was all about forgiveness. We need to, as Christians, we need to exercise forgiveness. And Rachel Denhollander had a really good thread on Twitter the other day about how, it's really an unpopular view to talk about this, but, and she said, Jacob and I have lost a lot of friends over this, but she said what's happening with the Duggars is that they've been weaponizing forgiveness, and they've been using that to enable Josh to continue this bad
Right,
behavior.
right.
And it's all about surrounding him and loving him and, minimizing the pain and the damage that he's done by calling it mistakes instead of crimes.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that it's not called a crime by the parents. It's called a mistake, which
Right.
you and I know. I mean, everybody knows that's not a mistake. Doesn't
Right.
happen by accident. As a parent, it deeply grieves our hearts to watch your child have to receive some kind of correction for something they have done that is sinful, that is wrong,
And criminal.
and criminal in this case. However, when we love our children in that deepest way possible, and I do believe the Duggars absolutely love all of their children. I do believe that. But in their naive thinking, they're thinking if we just surround Josh by love and support and forgiveness, this will erase what happened. And it does not erase it, nor
That's right.
does it help. I can remember with you kids growing up, there were so many times you kids went through painful things. And people would ask me, how do you do that as a mother? How do you sit back and let them take the punishment? It's hard. It's very hard, but we really learn that way.
Well, we need to experience pain too.
Yes.
I mean, you can't love people back to sanity. When somebody's out there breaking the law, conducting criminal activity, especially something as egregious as this, where you have minor children that are involved, you can't forgive or love them back to health. They need to suffer the consequences. And I don't think Josh has ever done that. I don't think anybody's ever
felt the pain of what he's doing.
Yeah, they've never allowed him
Right.
to experience the full swift punishment of the justice system. I think he's going to get it now. He's looking at 20 years per charge. There are two charges. So he's potentially looking at a 40-year prison sentence.
Right,
That's a
is
huge
sad
deal.
Because, well, it's very huge. It's very huge. It's sad, but as we'll discuss as we dig deeper into this, it possibly could have been diverted.
Yeah. Well, and I want to point out viewing child images online because that's not a victimless crime, and it's not accidental, as you mentioned before. It's not accidental.
No.
So I think what a lot of people think is, somebody has a pornography addiction, which is what Josh claimed back in 2015 when he was caught on Ashley
Right.
Madison.
I remember
He
all
claimed
of
that he had a
right.
porn addiction, which you hear abusers say that a lot.
Right.
Think about Tiger Woods and people like that. They say they have this sex addiction and they're going to go to therapy for their sex addiction. Josh claims that he has a pornography addiction. So what I experience a lot in the church is when people are charged on child explicit images, but they don't have a hands-on victim that people know about, they say, well, it's just
I know.
pornography.
Yes.
Well, it's not.
No, it's not just.
In fact, on my shelf here, there's a book. I think this is the book. Yeah. So it's an old book by Philip Jenkins, who is a professor at Penn State University and State College, just north of us. But it's called Beyond Tolerance: Child Pornography on the Internet. Now, this was in 2001 when the internet wasn't
like it is now.
No, certainly not like it is now.
No.
But this book is excellent, and he shows how intentional and how persistent people are for uploading and downloading, and trading these images. And he talks about these images in these videos. He said there's no mistake that these are children being brutally abused by adults. He said in these images and videos, he describes it, and of course he didn't view it, so he had to dig into records in different places. Mm-hmm. So what he would do is he would put all kinds of filters on his computer, and he would enter chat rooms, but he would put filters on so that he could never come across an image or a video. Okay. But he talked about how, in looking at reports, police reports and things like that, these images are so gruesome, and you can see it on the children's faces. And, trigger warning here, because, this is super heavy stuff. But make no mistake, people like Josh Duggar are not browsing through pornography on a porn site, and then they get into somewhere, maybe somebody uploaded something to Pornhub that is questionable, and it could be somebody younger than 18. That's not what this is.
This is not an oopsie accident.
And Josh's charges are for children under the age of 12.
Right.
So these are prepubescent
makes me sick.
Children.
Really, yes.
And these are not just pictures of kids bathing in a bathtub, if you know what I mean. These are gruesome images. And Philip Jenkins talks about how they trade them like they're baseball cards.
If I recall correctly, some of your father's charges were similar.
Yeah, he was producing
pictures,
images and videos with his victims.
Right. And none of this is by accident.
No.
None of it.
In fact,
it is so intentional. I'm how old, Jimmy, and I'm on the internet with my work hours upon hours every day. Mm-hmm. I have yet to come across anything like this.
Well, that's exactly right. Because it's not going to happen.
It will
You
not
don't
happen.
accidentally come across
1,000% certain
images and videos, not just come across it, but Josh downloaded them onto his computer.
Right.
You're talking very intentional.
Yes.
And so Philip Jenkins, and I really recommend this book, and it's a hard read. This is trigger warnings all over the place when you read this book. But he does such a phenomenal job, and I haven't seen a book come out since this in 2001 where somebody delves deep into these chat rooms and really gives you a feel for what these guys are thinking, what they're saying.
Another thing, and I know you and I did a podcast. It was probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, about how difficult it is to get into these chat rooms. That doesn't just happen.
Oh, yeah.
I have no idea how to do that.
Yep. And he said, too, these chat rooms disappear.
Right.
So he said, he would be in a chat room,
Yep.
and he would, he would find people that, after a while, you just learn terminology and,
Names.
certain patterns.
Right. Absolutely.
So, he would be able to identify certain people that he recognized. He didn't know who they were per se, but he recognized them from other chat rooms. Yeah. So he would go in and he would try to have a conversation with them, and then he'd log back on half an hour later, and the chat room would be gone.
Gone, yeah.
And he said what was amazing was these people find the new chat rooms when a new chat room is opened. These people find them immediately. They just know how to do it. And he said there's like this code where there's an ebb and a flow, and it's constantly fluid. And they're doing that to evade
Well, the
law
law.
enforcement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
So
close one chat room, start another one.
Right.
Trade the pictures, get what you're all about, close that down,
Right.
and go on.
And they
So,
even order them. So he said
right.
they put them out in series, and they'll order the photos and videos for like series 1A and 1B and 1C, and then series 2A, 2B, 2C, and on and on. And the idea is you kind of hook people, and you give them so much, and then you'll only release the latter part of that series once they give the latter part of their series. So it's this big trading business is what it is. And these are real images of real children who are really being abused. So this is anything but accidental. So I think people need to scrub this from their mind that people like Josh just stumbled upon this because he was browsing a pornography
but he's really
website.
a nice young man who was trying, but he got sucked in somehow, and this just suddenly happened.
Right.
It didn't just suddenly happen. For mom and dad to say, we really appreciate your prayers for our family at this time.
Specifically for Josh.
Specifically for Josh is evading what Josh has done.
Mm-hmm.
Period.
Yeah.
It is.
So I'll give a little bit of Josh's past because, Rachel Denhollander, again, in that Twitter feed, in that Twitter post, it was really good because she talked about the importance of patterns. And she's like, this isn't bringing up Josh's past and digging in the trash, so to speak, and ruining his reputation.
As was indicated in some of the articles
right.
that I read.
And she said, in fact,
right.
Quite the opposite happened, where you had law enforcement trying to bury this information to protect Josh.
Right.
So in 2015, Josh was outed for visiting Ashley Madison, which is that site for spouses to cheat. He admitted that he had multiple affairs on his wife. It was also uncovered that Josh began molesting children at the age of 14. There's a 2007 police report, which is heavily redacted, that lists forcible fondling for 5 victims of Josh's between 2002 and 2003. We found out later on that this was 4 of his sisters, and a family babysitter. In that report, though Josh's name is redacted, they confirmed that it was Josh, but he fondled the breast and genitalia while his victims slept. No charges were ever filed. In fact, Rachel talked about that in the post too. Mm-hmm. The state police, where they decided not to press any charges, that one trooper was actually caught for child sexually explicit images.
Does not surprise me.
So, they protect their own.
Yes, does not shock me.
So then, to make it worse, a judge ordered the original report to be expunged and destroyed. The parents, Jim Bob and Michelle, arranged for counseling at a conservative Christian counseling center. There's an interview of them that I think Megyn Kelly was the one who did that. At least she did it with the daughters, but I think she did it with the parents too. But they talked about it, and they said, Josh came to us, and they made it look like Josh was, he had this heavy burden on his heart.
Yes.
They said, we would have never known except that Josh came to us when he was barely 14, and he disclosed that he had done some really stupid mistakes. He made some really stupid mistakes. So they minimize it. No, so they minimize it in their language.
Yes.
And then they go on to say that we put him in counseling, so we knew that he couldn't be around children because he was molesting his own sisters. So we put him in this Christian counseling center. We sent him away to get help. And then when they came back, I just watched this video this morning, Jim Bob said, we felt that the last step that we needed to take was to take him to the police station. That should have been the first step.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not heavily criticizing the parents at this point because there are not a lot of resources for parents to know how to handle these kinds of situations. And
However, Jimmy, These are criminal acts that
Right.
we're talking about. We're not talking about that he took a piece of candy from a store, which is also
Mm-hmm.
a felony, but most parents will get that child. Most parents do this and cart them right back to the store and make the child walk up to the manager and say, I took this, I am so
Mm-hmm.
sorry, and
Right.
give it back. So parents know, we know, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I know, we parents know that this is wrong, and it
Right.
needs a lot of discussion and a lot of redirection for
Well,
sure.
and yeah, kids shouldn't go to Christian counseling centers for criminal child sexual abuse.
Right.
That's not
That's where I have an
within the
issue.
scope
Yeah.
of Christian
Right.
counselors.
Right.
And that's one of the problems. I mean, the Duggars grew up in this culture that's incredibly toxic. It's so for those of you who don't know, they're part of this quiverful movement, which is based on Psalm 127, that says having children is like having a quiver full of arrows, and it's a blessing to have your quiver full.
I'm smiling because I was told many times that I have my quiver full.
Yeah.
Which, yes,
So the idea is to have as many kids as possible, and your job is to reproduce. So it's a really twisted teaching. But then they were really good friends with Bill Goddard, and Bill Goddard is a cult leader. Him and the Duggars were really good friends. Bill Goddard had multiple charges. In fact, he was sued back in, I think, 2016. He has multiple charges for sexual misconduct. His victims eventually dropped the lawsuits, and I think because of statute of limitations. But this guy was huge on not sparing the rod. So he taught parents to beat the living tar out of their kids. I'm not talking just spanking. I'm talking brutal physical discipline.
Abuse. That's abuse also, another type of horrible abuse.
Right. So Bill Goddard, had some really twisted views on sexuality and, on and on and on. So the Duggars also were part of this courtship teaching that's part of the purity culture, where you don't show any physical affection, no holding hands, no kissing.
Right.
Josh talks about that, how he and Anna didn't kiss until their wedding
I
night.
watched the whole unfolding of the engagement and the marriage preparation for the marriage. I was just so drawn to them because they make on TV everything look so beautiful.
Oh, it looks glamorous and
They're all pure and one big huge happy family and everybody loving on everybody, and there are no upsets whatsoever. But anyway,
and that family is really fractured right now.
Very much.
And it's just sad to see.
It is. It's very sad.
So they're good buddies with Mike Huckabee. Mike Huckabee, of course, former governor of Arkansas. Mike Huckabee made this statement in 2015 when all this came out about Josh being on Ashley Madison, about him abusing his sisters when he was a minor. So here's what Mike Huckabee says. Janet and I want to affirm our support for the Duggar family. Josh's actions when he was an underage teen are, as he described them himself, inexcusable. But that doesn't mean unforgivable. He and his family dealt with it and were honest and open about it with the victims and the authorities. No purpose whatsoever is served by those who are now trying to discredit Josh or his family by sensationalizing the story. Good people make mistakes and do regrettable and even disgusting things. So, again, it's this asinine idea that this is in the past, it's been dealt with, it's unforgiving to bring this up, it serves no purpose, you people are just dragging a perfectly good name and a perfectly good family through the mud, and you need to buzz off.
You know what's weird? When you are truly repentant and when you do things the right way, most people support you in that when it's your child and they see. we don't like to see somebody's child suffer. We hate that.
Yeah.
But we do. We don't like to see that, and we usually say, God forbid that could be my child. That could have been my child.
Yeah.
And we mean that sincerely. But what he's doing is totally dismissing what was done. Just saying, you know what, this is a good family. These are good people.
They've dealt with it.
They dealt with it. Everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah.
The best of us do, which is true. We do. We all make mistakes. We don't all commit criminal acts, though.
Right.
We all don't
And
do that.
deviant criminal acts. This is sexual deviance at its core.
Worst.
Yeah,
Yes.
and at its worst.
Right.
So, our point for this episode is that as a minor, when Josh was a minor, when he was 14 years old, he should have been helped. Dr. Gene Abel, who wrote this book, the Stop Child Molestation book, What Ordinary People Can Do in Their Everyday Lives to Save 3 Million Children. It's by Dr. Gene Abel and his wife, Nora Harlow. This is a dated book, but it's still, I think, incredibly relevant. But he talks about success happening when intervention happens with minor child abusers. So I want to read a couple quotes from him because I think this is really important. So this is on page 94, and the title is A Groundbreaking Discovery. Let's see where we start. I'll start with this sentence. We found that children's first sexual experiences are critical to their adult sexual development. How do we define quote-unquote first? The child's first experience is the first one that the child identifies as sexual. The first experience where the child says, "This is sex." Those experiences or fantasies about possible sexual experiences become exceedingly powerful. The child and teenager pair those first fantasies with arousal. The pairing guides the child to develop his or her adult interests. This is true of all of us, including teenagers and adults who develop paraphilias. The man with a shoe fetish will recount his arousal to women's shoes starting at an early age. Men with urges to flash their penis, with urges to window peep, or with urges to sexually touch children will recount early sexual fantasies centered on the deviant behavior. The finding that turned out to be unexpectedly important was this: we can change people's sex fantasies. Scientists used to believe that our sex fantasies just entered the mind from who knows where, that the sex thought simply appeared and then there was nothing anyone could do about it. Now we know the powerful relationship between the child's first sexual experience, "this is sex," and his adult sex interests. We know that sometimes haphazard or accidental happenings in childhood lead to child molesting fantasies that often solidify in the memory bank. At the same time, other more appropriate fantasies of sexual arousal to people of the same age appear, but are mainly ignored. So this is really critical because what he's saying is when we intervene, when parents, well, first of all, he says the single most important thing that parents can do with their kids is to talk about sexual fantasies and sexual paraphilias and to let them know, one, that it's not okay to have sexual fantasies and to act out for children that are younger than you.
As I'm hearing you talk and as I listen to Gene Abel explaining this, in practicality, there are very few parents who are going to sit down and talk to their child that way, though.
Yeah, and we need to. It's the most important thing we can do.
We do. But, excuse me, allergies again. In practicality, let's be honest, very few parents are going to do that, which is a total disservice to our children.
Yes.
Total disservice. And as you were reading that, and Jimmy and I discussed this prior to the podcast, those connections that are made with sexual arousal, they do form a pattern.
Yeah, and if they're not interrupted while
Right.
that child is still in their youth,
Right.
then that sexual fantasy, and he talks about that sexual fantasy being paired with orgasm. So, in other words, to use explicit language, masturbation,
Right.
Or performing sexual acts on a
Right.
child. When those fantasies are paired with orgasm, he said it's this incredible reinforcement of those fantasies, and that becomes
Absolutely.
solidified in that child's mind. If we don't interrupt that pattern while they're still minors, there's incredible hope while they're still minors to reshift those fantasies into normal sexual patterns and to diminish the paraphilias. But if we don't interrupt that pattern while they're minors, once they get to adulthood, he and every other professional researcher and advocate, we all say the same thing. There is virtually no hope
No turning back.
for adults who are sexually abusing children because they're locked into those
Yes.
patterns.
Yes.
They're locked into those fantasies. They cannot, will not, and choose to not stop.
What I'm hearing in this case is if Josh's behavior, misbehavior, misconduct, criminal conduct had been addressed correctly when he was 14, his fantasies about children potentially could have been stopped, thereby diminishing or stopping altogether what happened in 2015, 2017, and now 2021. It has progressively gotten worse with him.
Which is always the case.
Yeah, which is always the case. And we can see that progression. The more involved he is, the deeper into it he gets, to where now he will serve possibly a prison sentence of up to 40 years in prison, which prison isn't where he's going to get rehabilitated.
No.
So
he'll get smarter in prison. He won't get rehabilitated.
Right. No. It's all heartbreaking, Jimmy. It really
it's this perpetual cycle. And Gene Abel, he laments that 1 out of 20 adult males will be sexual predators of children. 1 out of 20. That's an unacceptable number. That's a frightening number, given the amount of victims that adult child sexual abusers have. Given the number of victims that they have, the fact that 1 out of 20 children will grow up, male children, 1 out of 20, and it's about 1 in 3,000 females. 1 in 20 adult males. If you survey, look around a room. Go to any place where it's packed full of adults.
I often do that.
1 out of 20 of those adult males is a child sexual predator.
And I often think of how many have been abused as a child that are in that group. And then you think, excuse me, of the compounding issues of pain and grief and sorrow and brokenness.
Addiction and eating disorders, on and on and on, depression.
Is it any wonder that we see so much around us, so much brokenness, so much sin, so much deviant behavior? It's not been stopped when it should have been stopped. It's not been addressed when it should have been addressed. Why? Basically because it's uncomfortable to talk about.
Or we don't know what to do as parents. And I think, this is something that, we're telling you now what the answer is. The answer is talk to your children. And if your minor child is caught with sexual fantasies or is perpetrating on a younger minor child, for the love of God, intervene and stop that pattern and get professional help. Don't go to Christian counselors. Don't go to a family therapist. Gene Abel says it must be a sex-specific therapist, not a sex therapist
out there.
A sex-specific therapist who specializes in diagnosing children and intervening. And I just shared with you a story about a child who was at the age of 5. I won't name the organization or, give any clues as to where or what this was, but I was asked to observe a 5-year-old child who was a sexual predator. Very aggressive. So at age 5, wrap your mind around that. And I did the
I mean, that's
observation, and I was like, holy cow, this kid, I mean, it was unreal. Seeing the wheels spin inside of that kid's brain, looking for opportunities to manipulate, looking for opportunities
right.
to strike. So the long story short is there was an intervention. The parents were fully on board. They took him to a place where he was diagnosed properly. They did a radical intervention.
Now, back up just a second. Maybe explain to people what this child was doing.
Yeah, he was shoving his hand down kids' pants.
Okay, yeah.
He was flashing his penis in front of other kids. He would corner little kids. Very aggressive behavior.
Not all parents will know what, if anything, to look for.
Right.
And this was very, very clear behavior that was wrong.
And it was criminal
And it was,
behavior
right,
from a
criminal,
5-year-old.
Right.
So, all the proper organizations and, law enforcement, I mean, everybody who needed to be brought into that was brought into that. There was a group intervention plan that was changed or that was drawn out. He was properly diagnosed by a really reputable organization. He was medicated. I don't know if that was permanent or temporary. I'm not a child
physician or
psychiatrist, so I have no
yeah.
clue. But what's amazing is the person who had called me to observe said that when there was an intervention, that behavior stopped immediately. The predatory behavior, the manipulation, the exposing himself, the looking for opportunities to exploit other children, all of that radically stopped.
That just blows me away. And what I said to Jimmy is it would be really important to follow the case history of this child as
into
much
adulthood.
as possible into adulthood and see how much this early intervention really impacted the change in his life, because he obviously was headed for a life that
Of
was
criminality.
criminal
Right.
patterns.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, the point is Josh was sent instead to a Christian counseling facility. He was surrounded by his family, and forgiveness was placed above repentance. Forgiveness is this theme that's always first. We got to forgive and love.
Right.
And, as Mike Huckabee says, get off his back, man. Let me reread this. He and his family dealt with it and were honest and open about it with the victims and authorities. No purpose whatsoever is served by those who are now trying to discredit Josh or his family by sensationalizing the story. Good people make mistakes and do regrettable and even disgusting things. Period. That's insanity.
Yeah. What's interesting is nobody was rehashing his past. It had quieted down, really.
And been covered up.
Everything was buried, yes,
Right.
what I was going to say. Josh himself made these moves, these decisions. Josh himself did these criminal actions. Nobody was bending his arms backwards, saying you have to do it, or beating him into doing it. He did it, and knowing in today's age, Jimmy, I find it really hard, even for parents, for those of us, who might say, well, didn't quite know what to do. There's so much information available now
Yeah.
that we don't have very many excuses. And if we do, they're pretty flimsy. And
Yeah.
for Josh, I no, this wasn't a little regrettable mistake. This was very thought out, very well-intentioned criminal actions on his part.
And he was, those sexual fantasies were solidified because he had protection. People like Mike Huckabee, like his parents,
Right.
I'm sure his church community. It's that mentality where we're going to protect the abuser.
Right.
We're going to pray for him. Look at what all he's going through. After all, he confessed to it. Right. He's the one who came on his own free will to confess.
What is a shame is there had to be feelings of guilt in him at that point. And that's when, if you
I'm sure there was a
if you
14-year-old.
nip that and get proper help, I believe true repentance can happen. But as time rolls on and you're told, you know what, you just made a bad mistake. Good people make bad mistakes all the time. Jimmy or Josh or David or Karen, whoever. You're no different than anybody. You made a bad mistake. Let's, ask God to forgive you and we'll move on. It's not that simple.
Well, I think the sad thing about this, you bring up a good point. I think the very sad tragedy about this is that by Josh coming to his parents when he was 14 years old and telling them,
right, he needed
I
help.
walked in and I molested my sisters.
Right.
He was crying out for help.
That took guts and courage on his part.
And they should have gotten him the proper help.
That took a lot of guts on his part to do that. I can't imagine the burden that he was feeling to do that, because not all abusers will admit. And as we're saying, see now, he's pleading not guilty.
Well, not only that, but look at him now. He's 33 years old.
Right.
Look at his mugshot.
It's a shame.
Did you see his mugshot?
I did, yes.
He's smiling.
I know. It reminded me
He pleaded
of
not
someone.
guilty. I know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, right.
So this is what this produces, guys. His life as an abuser was marked out for him when his family failed to get him proper help. This isn't necessarily to criticize his family, because I think they did everything they thought they knew to do right at the time. But it's to say, guys, we got to do better. If you have children who are exhibiting predatory behavior towards other children, don't turn a blind eye to that.
It's got to be addressed. Yes.
Don't send them to a Christian counselor. Right. Don't say, well, we all make stupid mistakes.
Let me interject something too. Jimmy is not bashing Christian counselors. They have a place in family counseling or family therapy or whatever, but this
isn't their specialty.
Specialized therapy.
Yeah, you need a specialized, and that's what Gene Abel says. It needs to be a sex-specific counselor,
right?
Who specifically
who
specializes in dealing with children.
Absolutely, yes.
So Josh should have been charged as a minor, and shame on the state trooper who didn't press charges.
And we know why.
And I'm not saying that to be mean and to say that he should have done his time. The reason is, and a lot of people don't know this, is that sometimes the only way that you can get proper help through the state for a juvenile is if there are charges pressed, and then they enter into the court system, and then that opens up all kinds of doors for different organizations where they can get the help that they need.
Absolutely. I've seen that happen. Yeah.
Oftentimes, parents are left, if there are no charges that are filed against a juvenile, parents are left high and dry. They really are. Yeah. Those doors close really quickly because they now don't have access to those same organizations unless charges are filed against that juvenile. Right. So it's really important for the parents to really push for charges to be pressed. And keep in mind, the child's a juvenile, so those records are going to be sealed, which, I think is both definitely has good and bad
where you're
in
going
that.
With that, but it's always in hopes that when that child becomes an adult, the activity, the criminal activity in this case, has been addressed and cleaned up and changed.
Yeah. But really, it's an act of mercy
right.
When you press charges, because you're getting the child the help that they need.
Right.
Josh should have been charged as a minor. There's so much help that's out there. He was failed by his parents, by the police officers, and certainly by the judge who ordered his records to be expunged. There was help out there, and unfortunately,
now we look
people
at
covered
how
for
many
him.
more broken children, how many more abused children, how many. Look at Josh's family, his wife, his family,
right.
his parents, all will suffer along with him.
Yep.
And there he is with his mugshot with a smile, not recognizing the depth of pain that his criminal actions have caused.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we will leave you with this truth bomb for today. If you have a child who you even think there's a possibility that they could have sexual fantasies, get them help. even if you don't think that your child could have sexual fantasies of younger children, talk to them about it. Talk to them about it. It's the single most important thing that you can do. There is help that's out there. We thank you for tuning into this episode, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.